So many guitar players these days are choosing less traditional avenues when it comes to guitar amplification. Now, historically, we would always cart around big 4x12 cabs and 100-watt heads with us when we go and play shows. But in recent years, that's all changed with the sort of onset of modeling technology and the amount of digital stuff available, which is absolutely killer. But the guys at Blackstar have given us another new solution, and in this video we're going to check that out. This is called the Amped 1. So the Amped 1 is a new product from the guys at Blackstar. This is the next product in the Department 10 range. This is a fantastic solution for any musicians who need to travel light but take all their favorite tones with them. Now, this is a pedalboard amplifier. So at its core, this can drive cabinets. You can use this as a regular 100-watt guitar amp, and it's got a couple of different power scaling options. But there's some really cool features under the hood as well with Blackstar's cab rig software. So we can use this to power cabs or go direct to a PA, and it all fits in this really small package. Now, there are a lot of features in this thing, even though it's quite simple looking on the surface. It can do a lot. So before we dig into the specs, I just want to let you guys know that Blackstar are not paying me to create this video, but they have sent me this Amped 1 to create this video with. All the thoughts and opinions you hear in the video, as always, are my own. All right, so there's a lot of specs to get through with this thing, so let's get started. So on the top panel, this looks like a pretty typical Blackstar amp layout. There's a few features on here which you're going to be familiar with already. So the first control we've got here is the gain control. Now this is only a single channel unit, so there's no channel switching with this thing, so you do have to choose whether you want this to be clean or slightly overdriven. Now it's not designed as a high gain unit. There's not a ton of gain in this thing, but there is a bit of crunch, so you can get some heavier sounds if you stack some gain pedals with this, or you can just run it as a clean platform. So the gain control is going to basically determine how much gain we're going to be getting. We've got a 3-band EQ, bass, middle, and treble, pretty standard, and a master volume. Now, after the gain control, you'll notice there's this little 3-position toggle switch, which has UK, USA, and flat mode. So these modes give us the different characteristics for the gain circuit. So obviously when we're in the flat mode, this is where this unit is designed to be paired with different modelers or other sort of pieces of equipment. So the unit itself doesn't really color the tone. Then we've got the US and the UK mode. Think of this like Blackstar's ISF feature, where we're going to get British or American characteristics to the drive sound. Over on the master volume side, we've got another 3-position switch, which has 2 watt, 20 watt, or 100 watt mode. This determines the output wattage of the master volume for when you're driving a regular cab. So you can set this to 2 watt mode, really crank that headroom down, great for really just kind of driving the front end of this and getting a more saturated sound. And if you want the high headroom, put that to 100 watt mode and you've got a 100 watt clean amp. On the bottom layer, we have reverb. So this has built-in reverb, which is controllable via this foot switch. This section here will look very familiar to anyone who has used any of the ID Core or Silverline series amps. And this is the power amp response section. We've got all our favorite tube types. We do have a new tube type here, which is all the way at the bottom, which is linear. Linear is designed to be paired with the flat mode up here so that we get the flattest possible response from the unit. Then we've got all our other favorites. So we've got EL84 for those Voxy kind of tones, 6V6 for those little tweed amp style tones, EL34 for your British tones, 6L6 for your American tones, and then we've got KT88 for those big high headroom 60s and 70s British sounds. So we can pretty much dial in any sort of power amp response we want from this thing. Then on the back of the unit, we've got all the connectivity. So we've got a mini jack MIDI connection here. This is great for sending different MIDI signals to the unit if you're someone who's integrating this into a larger MIDI setup. We've got the input. So this is where you would plug your guitar or the signal chain from your pedals. An effects loop. Now this is only one jack here, but Blackstar do include a send and receive adapter with this. So you plug this little cable in, which has a split where you can add your send and return with this. Then we've got the cab outputs. We've got 8 and 16 ohm. They've also included 2 9-volt outputs for powering pedals. There's a USB connection here where you can use this with Blackstar's Architect software to control some of the cab rig stuff. And this actually runs off a kettle style lead as well. So your typical amp style connectors. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the back. Then we go to the side of the unit and we've got even more stuff. So this is the output section. So this is using cab rig. So we have a little toggle switch here with 3 different cab rig settings. So you can program 3 of your favorite cab rig settings or patches into this unit. We've got a volume output there for the cab rig. Then we've got the XLR out and the jack line out. So you can use either one of these to go straight to the PA system. You can also connect this with the line out here to headphones for silent practice or in front of another amp. So if you're running this into perhaps the effects return of an existing amplifier, you can use the preamp of this to kind of craft your sound. If you're someone who tours, for instance, put this into the effects return of an existing amp at the venue, and you can kind of use your own favorite sounds that way as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different features there for something that can basically fit on your pedal board and give you 100 watts of amplifier power. You can also run this in 2 different ways at the same time, which is quite cool. So from a gigging musician, this is incredibly useful. You could run a cab on stage with one of the outputs on the back, but then you could also use the cab rig side to go straight to the PA. Now this is really cool because this gives you 2 different sort of blending options. So you could have the sound of your cab on stage and you could have a completely different cab sound through the cab rig. Or you could use this for stage volume only. Perhaps you don't want any mics on stage and you just want this so you can hear what's going on stage, and your front of house guy wants to take a direct feed. There's so many different options you can do with a setup like this. And like I said, it fits in your pedal board, or you could just put this on top of your amp and kind of forget about it. This is an incredible feature for any gigging musician because you could literally put that in the front of a gig bag and away you go. You could go on tour and just use rented cabs or high backline and run this either into a cab or into the effects return of another amp and pretty much take your sound anywhere with you. So I think this is going to be a product that a lot of guitar players are really going to gravitate towards. Now, full disclosure, I have tried this before making this demo because at this year's 42 Gear Street, the guys at Blackstar invited me to get some first impressions of the unit. So I have played one of these before and I know what my opinions are, but I'm going to keep those to the end of the video. I'm going to plug this thing in now so we can hear it in action. All right, so gear-wise, I'm using my PJD Guitars St. John Standard for this video, and I'm plugged straight into the Amped one. There is going to be some overdrive later on in the video from the Analog Man King of Tone. I'll let you guys know when I turn that on and off. You're going to be hearing the Amped one in 2 different ways in this video. So firstly, you're going to hear it through the 2-note Torpedo Captor X, which I've got set on my usual IR, which is like a basement style cab in a big studio. So that's how we're first going to hear this, just simulating how this unit would drive a proper cabinet. You can also put this through a real cab, like I said. Then we're going to hear how this sounds through the cab rig presets. Now, because this is the demo unit, I don't know what the 3 cab rig presets that are built in currently are. We're just going to hear them and get a first impression of them. I'm not going to go too deep into how cab rig works, because I've already done a video on that, and if you guys want to see how cab rig works and how it looks inside, you can hit the link in the top corner. I did this video with the St. James 6L6 amp, but it's exactly the same version of cab rig for the Amped one. So go check that video out if you want to know more about how to tweak cab rig. So the first thing I'm going to do, you'll notice the EQ on this is set with everything straight up at midnight. Got the gain on midnight. I'm actually on 100 watt mode here with the master volume at about 2 o'clock. I'm going to start with the linear response, and I'm going to turn the reverb off. So I'm just going to play a little bit, and then I'm just going to tweak the EQ slightly. In this mode where we've got flat and linear, we should hear a pretty good, solid, clean platform. So this is great, like I said, if you want to pair this with different amp sims or maybe modelers and use this as a power amp to power a cab or straight to the PA. This is a great setting for that sort of thing. So in that mode, it is very, very flat. Now you can see how that would be great for pairing with different amp sims or modelers. It's a great solution for that kind of thing. Now you did hear it clipping a little bit there as I pushed that gain control. We were bringing in some overdrive there. So I'm just going to play that again briefly with the reverb on, just so you can hear the difference, because I do find that a completely dry sound, for me personally, is slightly uninspiring. So there are actually some really cool gain tones in there, even though this is not designed as a gain unit as such. It kind of is a clean platform. There are some really cool gain sounds in there. Now, because of the amount of responses we have here, coupled with the 3 voices, we have a lot of different tonal options. So it would take us quite a while to cover all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly play a few different ones on the UK mode. So typically when we get a UK amp, we're not going to get 6L6 tubes in there. There are exceptions to that rule, but typically, we kind of have an expectation of what we have from a British voiced amp. So I'm going to start with EL84s. I'm going to crank the treble a little bit here, because when we think of EL84s, we typically think of more of a voxy kind of thing. So there's a really nice push on that gain there as we go up. Now, when we also think of British sounds, we think of EL34s. Now, this is our typical 60s and 70s British amps. We know what those are. This is that kind of sound. And the other typically British tube response here is the KT88. Now, this is more of a kind of, to me, the 60s Eric Clapton-y Blues Breakers kind of thing. It's kind of like the EL34 sound, but a bit more open, much more headroom. I always think of 60s and 70s Eric Clapton before he moved over to the Tweed amps and that big kind of ringing AC/DC style chord sound. It's very kind of articulate in the top end, I find, a KT88. right, now we're going to check out some of the USA voicings. So on here, we have two tube types which are very much a part of the USA sound. First of which is the 6v6 sound. This is typically those small kind of tweed style amps. So for this, we want quite a lot of mids, actually. I'm actually going to start by just cranking all the EQ, actually, to really kind of get into that small kind of champ style sort of circuit. Because this is quite a low headroom sound, I'm going to go to the 20 watt mode as well. So there's some great champ tweedy kind of sounds there from the 6v6 mode. Now the other typically American sound here is going to be the 6L6, which we're going to check out. Now 6L6 is super high headroom cleans, but also very tight scooped metal tones. Now, like I said, we're not going to get a ton of gain out of this thing on its own, but you can pair this with other drive pedals. So if you've got your favorite high gain drive pedal, you could certainly use this thing for metal. So because we're going for a 6L6 thing, I'm going to scoop the mids just a touch and just bring the bass and treble up slightly. So you can see there that the 6L6 mode, because it's such a high headroom response type, and this isn't a super high gain preamp, there's not a lot of push to that. What we can do is if I turn on the Analog Man King of Tone, we're now going to get the same thing, but with a bit more bite. Now, obviously, I'm not using a huge amount of gain there because I'm not a high gain player. But like I said, you can mix this with your favorite high gain sounds if you want. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, this doesn't have a ton of gain on its own, especially in the 6L6 mode. There's a bit more push if you go to something like the EL34 mode, for instance, and then we pair it with the King of Tone. Now we're going to get a slightly heavier sound. But obviously, I'm using the Analog Man King of Tone there to push the front end of the amped one even more. So you can pair this with your favorite high gain pedals, and then you can get into some much heavier territories. If you took a really high gain drive, put it into the 6L6 mode and scoop those mids, you definitely get some of those really kind of scooped heavy metal sounds. And likewise, you can use it on something like the 6v6 mode and just use a lower gain sound, like a boost. And what we're then going to get is just like a boosted kind of tweed amp sound. The cool thing with the way the reverb is configured in this as well is that as you push the amp, the reverb also becomes louder. So because we're essentially cranking everything here, that reverb was really, really prominent, even though it's quite low in the mix. So let's just get a cleanish sound now. I'm just going to leave it on the 6v6 setting on 100 watt mode. And I've got the reverb there just under halfway. There's enough reverb there to be pleasing, but we can crank it all the way up here. And there's quite a bit there, but then as we increase the gain, we're going to get more reverb. I really like the sound of the reverb on this, and I think it was a really, really smart idea for Blackstar to include that, because having a good reverb makes a big difference to how a sort of amp simulator sounds, I think, because we don't tend to hear amps completely dry. Even when we're playing them live, we tend to hear them in the room that they're being played in. So I do think having a good reverb is very essential to that. So now we're going to talk about the headroom, and that is going to be through this power switch. So the way I'm going to demonstrate this is with the tweed mode again, because this is the one that kind of clips the easiest. So I'm just going to dime it once more for you. And we're going to start off in 2 watt mode. Now what you're going to hear is 3 very different volumes, because I'm going to be feeding 2 watts, 20 watts, and 100 watts out of the pedal into my Captor X. But as we increase the power, the headroom is also going to increase. So not only is it going to get louder, but the ceiling for clipping and compression is going to be much higher. So on 2 watt mode, it's going to overdrive sooner, because obviously we're hitting that kind of maximum threshold at a lower volume, which makes the preamp and the power amp go into saturation. Then as we kind of increase, we're raising that, so the compression is less and the saturation is less. Now, those differences may not be super apparent when you're hearing it through an IR loader like this, but where you're really going to hear those differences are when you're driving this into a real cabinet. Because if you had a real cab out there with a 2-watt mode absolutely cranked, you're going to be putting 2 watts of power through the speaker cabinet. It's not going to be super loud, but it's going to compress and clip easier than if we put it into a 100-watt mode, let's say. Exactly the same way a regular tube amp would work. Blackstar are really great at simulating these different power amp feels, depending on the volume. This is something I think they've always been really great at as a company, is kind of figuring out how different amps feel at different volumes. Now, when we play a 100-watt amp, it feels different to a 2-watt amp because that compression and that kind of early overdrive that happens with a lower watt amp is something that gives it a slightly different feel. There's a different kind of sag to it, and it makes it slightly different to play compared to a fully opened up 100-watt amp with tons of headroom. So you kind of have to feel that one to hear the difference, I think. You can hear the difference in the amount of drive, even though the volume is considerably different in this situation. But like I said, if you're driving this into a real cab, then you're really going to feel the difference between those 3 modes as well. So now we're going to hear how this sounds through the cab rig output. Now, as I mentioned, there are the default cabs that are already built into here. So I'm just going with those. I'm not going to open up Architect and tweak those in this video because there is a full-length video in that top corner you can click if you want to see the inner workings of Architect and cab rig and see how all that works. It's exactly the same for this pedal. So I'm just going to go with whatever the 3 that are preset into the pedal are. So right here, which you can't quite see, there's a 3-position switch, which is currently set to position 1. And as you can see here, there's an XLR cable coming out of the side of the pedal. This is going straight into my audio interface. So I'm going to start off by cycling through the 3 cabs with some clean sounds. So I'm going to do a 6L6 style setting, slightly scoop those mids, nice and clean, high headroom sound. I'm going to have some reverb on for this as well. So I'm going to play through cab 1, 2, and 3. Here is number 1. Now I'm going to switch this over to cab number 2. And finally, cab number 3. So those are the 3 built-in cabs with a clean tone. So now I'm going to dial in a British style crunch tone. So I'm going to use the EL34 style response, and we're going to kick up the gain, push those mids a little bit more, and keep the master cranked. And I'm back on cab number 1, and it sounds like this. Cab number 2 sounds like this. And cab number 3 sounds like this. So the differences between the 3 cabs are way more apparent there with a crunch tone, I think. The middle one is definitely way more scooped. In the clean tone side, it's not as noticeable to my ears. There are differences, but I think the cab choice is much more apparent when you come to those driven tones. Now, that said, I am just working with the 3 presets that are in the unit. Like I said, you can do so much stuff with cab rig, and if you want to find out more about that, go and hit that link in the top corner. Check out my cab rig video where you can see how all that stuff works. So in a nutshell, that is the new Blackstar Amped 1. Now this is, in my opinion, a great product. I love the Department 10 line, and I've actually been using the Department 10 dual drive as a kind of live preamp for a long time now, because it does have that capability to go straight into the PA through cab rig. So I'm essentially using it for what this is designed for. But this is that idea, but more refined. So the Amped 1, in my opinion, is a great product. I'm really, really into this. I am a big fan of Blackstar anyway, as you guys know, but I really like what this offers me as a guitar player. The fact I could put this on a pedal board, take it with me, or even put it in my gig bag and literally show up at a show, XLR cable straight into the PA, there's my sound. Or I could pair it with a cab, or I could mix and match. I love that, and I love the fact that I can get in there and tweak cab rig to my own tastes as well. I think the addition of the reverb was a fantastic idea from the guys at Blackstar, because that's the one thing I personally thought was missing from the Department 10 dual drive, even though it's a drive pedal, so it wasn't designed for this purpose exactly. But I did think this would be great if it had reverb. And there it is with reverb. I definitely think the amount of different sounds you can dial in with the different responses and the voice switch are fantastic. You can do this on the Department 10 stuff as well, because it's all built into cab rig. But again, being able to do it here from the top panel, I think, is a godsend. I also did forget to mention one thing earlier on in the video, which is the preset switch. You can have your favorite preset and use this as a recall as well. So I didn't use that because I was just tweaking it in real time. But if you have a favorite sound that you want to recall at any point, you can use this preset switch here for that purpose. So yeah, like I said, I like the Amped 1. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's got some great tones, and it's an incredibly usable and practical product. And I think this is something Blackstar are absolutely nailing with the stuff they're putting out at the moment. A product like Amped 1 kind of makes you feel like a company like Blackstar is really listening to what modern guitar players need. Now, I can dial in all my favorite classic sounds with this thing, but it's not a heavy tube amp that I need to carry everywhere, which is great because for a musician like me, I do a lot of shows where I do have to pack light. Sometimes I can literally just take a pedal board and go straight to the PA. This is perfect. This would also be really cool to pair with a real amp. You could use this in stereo with a real amplifier and run cab rig to the front of house and then have your amp on stage for different things. There's so many possibilities of what Blackstar are enabling guitar players to do. And they're also not losing sight of the fact that they are an amp company. So this, even though it's in pedal form, is still an amp. It's still a 100 watt amp that sounds great and feels great. And I think that's the important thing here. It feels great to play. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Amped 1. What do you guys think? Let me know down below in the comments what you think of the new Blackstar Amped 1. And when you get your chance to try one, let me know what you think. And I'd love to hear your experiences with this product as well. I am looking forward to getting to know this thing a little bit better because I do feel that there's so much potential of what you can do with this. Now, like I said, we really only scratched the surface here because I just talked about the responses paired with their typical voices. We could really go to town here and dial in a 6v6 UK amp or a EL34 American amp, things that we don't usually associate together, but we can do those combinations with this as well, which I think is fantastic. So this is a tweaker's dream. You can basically make this sound like whatever you want it to, which I think for a modern guitar player is such a great thing. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. And while you're down there doing that, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel as well. I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks so much for watching.